John, is this? I mean, it's an interesting move about the boss stepping aside. Is that ominous? Do you think about the future of the Port of Darwin?
Look, I suggest that it is. I mean, you only have to look past. So over the last sort of couple of years, the arguments around the decision on the port or against that decision in terms of security have been pretty narrowly focused. So, you hear a lot of people talking about examples of, you can take photos of masts, or you can collect electrical arrays and emissions, etc. But in reality, that's the small problem. The big problem is one of two things. First off, is that do we as a nation want to put the control of the future development of our most important northern deepwater port in terms of our economy and national security in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party or a Chinese state-owned enterprise? And secondly, are we willing to accept the opportunity costs of our partners and allies not being able to visit and use the port? And I think on those two things alone, I don't think the government's got any choice.
It was a mistake to do it in the first place, wasn't it?
Look, you know what? I think that I always say I'll leave the finger pointing to those who do it best. But what I will say is this, is 2015, when the decision was made, there were a number of national security strategists and policy people concerned about the decision. But it was a very different environment. If you think about it, 2014, we saw the high watermark of our economic relationship with the Chinese. We saw Xi Jinping visiting Australia. And I think people had a really wishful desire that globalisation and that the rise of China was going to be only a good news story. I think if we look at the 2016 Defence White Paper, we see some real changes. Last year, the Defence Strategic Update in October really made it clear to us, which was, for the first time since the 80s, we're likely to have less than 10 years warning of a future major conflict.
If you even get that. But what happens if this is divested, John? What's the play from China? I mean, they're not going to just cop it, are they?
No, look, I think there can be no doubt that the Chinese Communist Party will react in a short, sharp way. There'll be plenty of rhetoric thrown around, and more than likely there'll be some economic ramifications of that. I do suspect that, there'll be some statements made by senior spokespeople along the lines of, look, can Australia be trusted in taking foreign investment? Look at the French and the submarines. Look at Darwin Port. I think they'll try to take it out of context. But at the end of the day, the real decision for the Australian people remains, and for Australian politicians and policymakers in this space, do we leave the future of this important strategic port to the decision-making whim and investment of a Chinese state-controlled entity?
It would be a significant cost to the taxpayer, wouldn't it, to break that lease?
Look, what I would say to you is this, is that I think the discussion on what next is the more complex one. And while it's sort of played out in the media as a binary decision, so keep the lease or do another lease and lease it to someone else, or buy it back, I should say. I think there's a lot of different variations in there. And I think this is part of the reasons why it's going to take some time to unpick. So for those sitting around waiting, saying, will we get a decision in 2021 or will it happen before an election in 2022? I suggest we'll see an announcement in the first part of next year that the arrangements have to change. And I think it's going to take a while to work out exactly what those change arrangements look like.
What is some of the options that are also being discussed is that Landbridge keeps the lease, but there will be changes elsewhere, such as regular security reviews. There will be more and stringent checks on staff. Would that be enough, or does that just kind of delay the inevitable?
Look, I think that touches on some of the security concerns. But again, I don't think it sort of sits and covers off on those big investment issues. As it stands at the moment, what's really important for Australia's national security is our engagement with our partners and allies across the region, be that bilateral with ourselves and the US or ourselves and the Japanese, or be it something bigger than that, which is the Quad. But regardless, I think that the real opportunity here is creating some sort of joint naval facility in Northern Australia, in Darwin Harbour. But that only remains possible if there's a change in ownership.